Life. All those and more on the ABC Listen app.
I always think politicians a bit more open, a bit more candid when they're leaving politics or when they've left. The biggest story, of course, out of the 2022 election wasn't the change of government so much. It probably was the teal wave. That was certainly the way it was covered at the time. 7 female independents who campaigned largely on climate change, integrity and some other key issues, wrestled away a bunch of long-held Liberal seats, so much so that actually teal was the word of the year in 2022, you might remember. One of those independents was Kylea Tink, who won the seat of North Sydney. That seat, though, has been abolished by the Australian Electoral Commission during the latest seat redistributions. And that means that Kylea Tink is leaving federal parliament. She's giving her valedictory speech this afternoon in Canberra. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Hamish.
How are you feeling about leaving politics, or are you even leaving politics for good?
Well, it's a bit of a plot twist, really, isn't it? I don't think you could write a story like this. How do I feel? You know, I'm leaving with an extraordinary sense of gratitude for the experience that the last 3 years has been. It's been an incredible learning experience, Hamish, to be a really ordinary human being and then find yourself on the inside of Parliament to see how it works is extraordinary. I wish I could send every Australian here because I actually think it's what our Parliament is missing. So, you know, I leave with gratitude. I leave with learnings that I have no doubt will be with me for life. And yes, I can confirm at this stage I am leaving come this election. It doesn't mean I'm walking away from the community independent movement. You know, with 33 communities have announced they're going to run a candidate in 2025. So I will throw my experience and my weight behind all those new candidates to try and get as many of them elected for our 48th Parliament.
For listeners that don't necessarily keep across all the detail of seat distributions, what's happened to North Sydney? It's sort of been split up into different electorates, as I understand it.
Yeah, it has. You know, North Sydney was actually one of the first electorates ever created in Australia. It was one of the original 70 divisions that were created back in 1900, which means we were one of the first seats to ever contest the federal electorate. The seats of Warringah, Bradfield and Bennelong followed us then through the 1920s and 1930s. And, you know, North Sydney has always held its own in our 124 years of history until the most recent Australian Electoral Commission review, where they decided to abolish North Sydney. Now that community will be dispersed across the 3 seats that I just mentioned. So Warringah gets a third, Bradfield gets a third, and Bennelong gets a third. And while it's definitely the end of an era, I have no doubt that, you know, those electorates will be stronger because of the people that they will inherit in the 2025 election.
I did read some reports suggesting maybe you go for the Senate. Is that off the table?
Look, I think there is definitely an argument for growth of independence in the Senate. I'm unlikely to do that in this election, though, because, you know, to run for the Senate in New South Wales, I think you have to truly be able to represent the entire state of New South Wales. And I would need to do the groundwork to earn, you know, that level of support across the state. So it's probably not on the cards for 2025, but that's not to say I'm completely dismissing it for 2028. If I know anything, the one thing I do know, Hamish, is that a bigger crossbench in the House of Reps has created better legislation and has been a stronger push for a way forward. So I think we need that in both houses in the long term.
Yeah, I do want to ask you about that. You're listening to 702 ABC Sydney. I'm speaking to Kylea Tink, the outgoing member for North Sydney, who will give her valedictory speech this afternoon in the federal parliament. The criticism of the Teals and independents generally is, well, what do they achieve? What do you get if you're a voter and you're represented by one of them, and there can never be a member of a party that forms government? They might offer support to a government one way or the other. How do you respond to that? What do Teals actually achieve?
Yeah, look, I wish we had more time because the truth of the matter is we've achieved an extraordinary amount in this 47th Parliament, and I have no doubt that that momentum is only going to grow. There's a few things I would really like people listening today to understand, and you know, that is, they have a choice between electing somebody who will come to this place and actually represent a party, or elect somebody that will come to this place and represent them. And that's the biggest difference that a community independent makes in this place.
But what about tangible outcomes? Because I guess that's what we all want to see in our lives.
Yeah.
We want to see politicians that deliver actual results.
Yeah, definitely.
What's an example of what a Teal can deliver that a major party politician can't?
Well, we started straight out of the gun, I think, when this Labor government was elected, working with the government on the climate bills, and the first iteration of the climate bill was very unambitious. In fact, 43% was kind of the highest target they wanted to set. And as somebody on the crossbench, I worked really closely with the Minister, Chris Bowen, to get that legislation amended so that 43% was a floor, not a ceiling. So I think the crossbench brings ambition to otherwise fairly pedestrian legislation. I think we also then saw it with the lifting of the single parent payment. Previously, families missed out on that parenting payment once their youngest child turned 8. By working directly with the Minister and the government, we got that re-established to the youngest child turning 14, which enables women to stay and work longer and kids to have the support they need at home. So they're two really tangible ones. Perhaps the highest profile one, though, is actually the HECS reform that we've seen. It was actually myself who raised with the Minister, Jason Kylea, that the way HECS is indexed and the timing of that is fundamentally broken. It means that young Australians are charged essentially interest on money they've already paid back. And I think I've never heard any words more satisfying than Minister Kylea on the floor of Parliament saying, you know what, I think Tink's got a point. We need to fix that. And as a consequence, we've seen the HECS model in this country now completely revised, and in fact, students now receiving rebates. So all of that has come from people like myself, putting ourselves in a position where we don't just say no to legislation because it's not our idea. We actually work with the government to make it better.
I suppose we've all witnessed, though, how difficult it's been for the government to pass legislation in certain areas, particularly things like housing, which we all know is an issue. We've even been talking about that issue this morning. As we head into another federal election, what do you say to voters that think, well, actually, if I really want something done, I might need a government, one, of one side or the other, with a clear mandate, a clear majority that can just get stuff done?
I think that would be really reductive thinking, and I think it would be to the detriment of our country. Hamish, we've seen majority governments in this country for at the federal level for most of our democracy. And as my grandmother used to say, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing again and again, expecting a different result. It wasn't Teals who stopped things like housing reform in this House. It was the Liberal Party who have a very clear modus operandi.
Wasn't it with the Greens?
Well, but the Greens aren't independents either, Hamish. So we're quite different when it comes to how we operate. So
there's 3 Greens in the lower house. There's less of them than there are of you.
4 Greens in the lower house, yeah, and there is. But that's what I'm saying. It wasn't the lower house that stopped the progress of that legislation. It was the upper house. And in that case, it was the Liberal coalition aligning with the Greens to stop that legislation. Now, I think that is it is a real crime. People like myself worked with the government in the lower house to improve that legislation. What went to the upper house should have passed. And so what I would actually say to Australians is send more of us. If you want sensible government, if you want people who are prepared to work with whoever finds themselves in the majority to make sure that the legislation is not just passed because they think it's the best idea, that it's actually passed in a way that is better for all of us, then you need people that are here not because we're motivated by politics or power, but we're motivated by our people. And our people send us here to produce sensible results. Now, that's what community independents do, and I can't wait to see a balanced parliament that brings those voices back into the debate, because at the moment, when you have a government that is in a pure majority, they operate this place on the basis that we have the numbers, therefore we're right and you're wrong and we're not listening. That does not produce good legislative reform.
Your latest news headlines are just a few minutes away here on 702 ABC Radio Sydney. I'm talking to Kylea Tink, the outgoing member for North Sydney. One of the big issues in North Sydney right now, and we've been talking about it here this morning, are council plans to lift rates by nearly 90% over the next few years. It'll be debated at a meeting tonight. Do you understand why people are so unhappy about this?
Oh, absolutely, Hamish. We're in a cost of living crisis no matter where you live. And the truth of the matter is, in my community of North Sydney, there are lots of people, and I'm in the federal electorate of North Sydney, which actually includes 4 council areas. There are lots of people that are struggling. We have the highest costs of childcare expenses. We have the lowest rate of Medicare bulk billing. A headline like this is understandably going to get people upset. The problem we do have, though, is that we also have one of the lowest rates of council rates in our area. The North Sydney council rate, the lowest rate you can pay is about $714 a year, I think, and that's significantly lower than what the residents of Lane Cove or Chatswood or even, the North Shore Mossman area pay. So I feel for this council. They are in a very difficult situation. This problem is not of their making. This comes from the 29 federal election, basically, where the Libs tried to pork barrel North Sydney by giving it $10 million worth of regional sports grants to fund the upgrade of our not-so-regional North Sydney pool. So, prior to that project was simply addressing some concrete cancer that was in a stand. It was fully budgeted, fully costed, fully scoped, would have been delivered by that council, but they took the $10 million. The project floodgates opened, and it's become this behemoth of a project that was not ever meant to be. So I understand people's concerns.
That project is now, I think the latest estimate is well over $100 million to complete it. Should there be some kind of inquiry into this?
Absolutely.
What kind?
Well, I think the people that were responsible for shoveling that money towards North Sydney should be investigated, as should the people who accepted it and pursued that money. There was no business case put forward around that money at the time it was offered, and I just think that that's unethical. Australians are tired of that, and actually today in this place, my colleague Allegra Spender will move a private members bill to bring greater transparency and accountability to public funding, and I guess we find ourselves going full circle, Hamish. That's what independents bring. We open up the tough conversations in this place.
Kylea Tink, thank you very much for your time and good luck.
Always a pleasure. Thanks, Hamish.
That's the outgoing member for North Sydney who will give her valedictory speech this afternoon, Kylea Tink. We'll have your news headlines in a moment.